to the podcast of Post Mormon Peace. I am your host, Derek Williams, and welcome to this episode. This is the first full length episode. And before I get going into things too much and real deep, I thought it would be really good for me to just take the opportunity to share my own story and to talk through things so that as you listen to me talk about my ideas and my experiences and interview others, that you have some context, you have an idea. Oh, this is who Derek is, this is where he came from, and some background. We're all going to have different backgrounds and stories for how we got where we are, but hopefully as you listen, try and listen as if you're hearing things for the first time. So what I mean by that is anytime you're listening and you think, oh, I know what he's talking about. Yeah, that's fine. And you can resonate with that, but also try and listen and think of the things. What would that feel like to be in that exact situation? That will allow you to get a lot more out of this experience. As you listen to me, as you listen to other guests that are on the show, I think that's a great way to approach things, even everything in life. Whenever a lesson that I've learned is anytime I have been in a conversation with someone and I start to think, oh, yeah, I know what they're talking about. Whenever I do that, I mentally kind of like clock out. I check out of the conversation. I think, yeah, I know what they're talking about. I don't need to listen anymore. And if you can avoid doing that and just think, how do I listen to this as though it's the first time I'm hearing or discovering this idea, it's going to allow you to get so much more out of life, out of conversations. So that being said, let me start and share a little bit of my story with you. Um, I'm going to try and keep most episodes closer to somewhere around like the 30-minute mark. Maybe some of them will be longer, closer to an hour, depending on like the guest or what the episode is about. But we'll see what happens today. There's definitely going to be episodes in the future where I go deeper into some of my own experiences and expand on what I'm telling you today. Today is to be able to get kind of like a bird's eye view of my own experience and how I got to where I'm at. So, that being said, let me jump into things. So, I grew up in Utah. I was born in Salem, Utah, which is a small town 20 minutes south of Provo, like an hour south of Salt Lake. I am the oldest of 7 kids in my family. I had incredibly loving and supportive parents that I'm very close with and appreciate very much to this day. I'm super fortunate to have them. Um, I when I grew up in the church, I was very into it. I was that kid in Sunday school class where I was always raising my hand. I wanted to show that I knew the answers. I wanted to study. The first time I read the Book of Mormon full all the way through was when I was 8 years old, and I would keep track. Every time I finished it, I would write it, the date that I completed it, in the back of my Book of Mormon. And I got a lot of fulfillment out of feeling like I felt the Spirit. I still remember the feelings of going to church and thinking, wow, I just love this feeling that I have. It's almost like I just feel on fire. I feel motivated. There was also this feeling of like purity at times, of clarity, this amazing feeling of clarity. And I felt like, and I remember listening to um, Henry B. Eyring and him talking about how you can feel the Spirit to confirm to you things that are true, even in things that are not religious. And so I remember feeling that in school too. When I learned something, I just feeling like this excitement for what I was learning and just having that experience of like, oh yeah, this is the Spirit telling me that this is true. Um, so I was really excited to go on a mission. Both of my parents served missions. They spoke Spanish, and so I thought for sure, being ambitious and being, I thought I was a smart kid. And I thought, for sure I'll get called to a mission speaking a foreign language, and it'll be a really cool experience. I'm excited to share it with everyone. And I think partly for, I guess I always had this idea that missionaries that were like kind of smarter or more on top of things in life were probably more likely to go foreign. So when I got my mission call to Oklahoma, I was not particularly excited about it. Um, to back up for a second, I went to Snow College for a year before my mission. And while I was at Snow, it was a really good experience. I remember going that first weekend, and there was that first Sunday, and my roommates weren't moved in yet. And I had that thought. I was like, man, I don't know anyone here. I could just stay here today. I don't have to go to church, and no one will ever know the difference. No one will know a thing. And it was a cool moment. It was a pivotal moment for me where I could decide, who am I going to be? Who am I at my core when no one is watching? So, and I think those can be very powerful experiences for anyone to go through, regardless of religion. Um, so I went to church that Sunday, and that was a big step for me. I was really big in studying preach my gospel and getting ready to serve a mission. Like I said, I got my mission call to Oklahoma, and I was excited about it. Um, I still remember the very first time I ever questioned the church or questioned my beliefs, and it was when I was 18 at Snow College. um, there was a roommate. He wasn't my roommate, but he was a guy that I got to be good friends with, and he definitely was not living a lifestyle conducive to the church. He used, certain recreational drugs, and but I liked being around him. He was nice. He was funny. He taught me to play pool. We played pool a bunch. I'd go rabbit hunting with him. Um, and I still remember there was a day that we were just sitting in my apartment and talking, and he basically asked the question. I think we had been talking about religion, and I was kind of like, I'm like pre-missionary mode, and so I'm wanting to share with him and say, hey, why don't you believe, why don't you do this? And he asked me the question. He said, Derek, if tomorrow, if there was this huge beam of light in the sky, and this being came down, and it was this purple alien, and the purple alien said, I am God, um how would you react? Would you question your beliefs, or would you still believe what you believe? And that was like, whoa. What? I've never thought of that. Like, he basically painted a picture for me where it was like, if I was forced to recognize that there is a high likelihood that my beliefs are not true, what would I do in that situation? And that was the first time. It was the first time I ever questioned. It was really strange. Um, I didn't think through it too much. I kind of put it in the back of my mind, um, and I went on my mission. Um, I actually met my wife in the MTC. She was going to Oregon. We actually never talked individually, but I was super impressed by her. She just always had a huge smile on her face. She just was like beaming with light, and had the most amazing smile, twinkle in her eyes. And I ended up getting the mission home address, and that's how we ended up connecting. It was not actually through like talking in the MTC, which is really interesting, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But I went on my mission, and I got to Oklahoma. Tulsa was the mission home, and my first assignment was to Mountain Home, Arkansas. And it's not like super small town, maybe something like 50,000. Um, and I got there. My trainer was really cool guy, really nice, and super humid, super hot. I was June. I got there in June, and I still remember like the blaring cicadas, how hot it was. We'd go out in the morning. We'd walk out of the apartment. My companion had glasses, and they would just immediately fog up. So it was a fun experience. I look back with fondness. I had a lot of excitement and energy and zeal, but it was also challenging. I didn't particularly enjoy feeling so much pressure to go and talk to people that I knew didn't want to talk to me. But I also had this fire, and I was relatively aggressive. There was one point where I told my trainer, like, dude, come on, like, why aren't you talking to people? And anyway, it was interesting, and I considered myself to be like a hard worker and very committed to the work. We started to have conversations with other people that I would listen to, and they had very strong religious beliefs that were different than mine, and they were also relatively confident in their beliefs. And they may challenge me in some way. And like a good missionary, I'd bear my testimony, or something like that. But at the same time, I questioned. The main thought in my head was, man, like, these people are older than me. They've been through more in life, and they're pretty firm and committed in their belief. I don't even really know what they believe. How can I be so committed to my belief and that this is true and that mine is somehow a more correct version than theirs? And that was tough. It was tough for me to reason through and to think through. Um, Fortunately, as a missionary, like, there's not a lot of time to really think and contemplate. I mean, I suppose there is, study time every morning, but I was memorizing scriptures, I was learning the lessons, I was just focused on the work. I was focused on, like, hitting our weekly goals as far as how many people to talk to, how many lessons to teach, working towards baptisms. Um, but it was challenging. And as my mission went on, um, I still remember, let's see, this was my second or third area in McAlester, Oklahoma. And I remember it was my first time meeting an atheist. Kind of interesting to think about now. I haven't thought about this for a while. But there was some guys in their 20s out on this porch in McAlester, Oklahoma, small town. And, we talked to them. They were really nice. They were open, and they were atheists. And they asked a lot of questions that I was like, man, these are actually really good questions. I don't know how to answer this. I don't know really how to reason through this. I feel like they have, pretty valid points. Um, that was a tough area for me. I remember praying and asking God for a confirmation. I remember having the thought, um, I had this thought that, man, maybe it would benefit me if I was to take like some kind of sabbatical from missionary life and go and just spend like 6 months just studying other beliefs and other religions in an effort to strengthen myself and to become more committed, or to be able to make whatever a correct decision was as far as defining my beliefs and stuff like that. But that was also very challenging. Like I said, I'm the oldest of 7 kids, and so I felt this big responsibility to be an example. Um, the whole time that I was going through a lot of these things, there was also this question in my mind that they talk about gifts of the Spirit, and some have the gift of belief, and I thought, oh, I just don't have that gift. And over time, I started thinking, okay, the church is probably true, but I there must be something wrong with me. It's a lack of belief. It's I've got a critical, analytical mind, and it just makes it tough for me. So the church must be true, but there's a problem with me. And like I said, that pressure of not wanting to screw things up for the rest of my family and my siblings was pretty heavy. And so I just decided to stick it out. For those reasons, that seemed to be like the best decision. And in a lot of ways, I do think it was the best decision. This is extremely challenging. Like, there's still, when I look back on my mission, I think it's the hardest experience of my life. And number one was, like I shared before, I didn't want to get up every morning and just know that I was going to have to go talk to people all day that I didn't know and that probably didn't want to talk to me. Um, and the other reason, well, so I would wake up with like there's just this pit in my stomach every morning. Study, I just remember like feeling that feeling, and the way that I had to address that was the first person that I saw every day when I walked out of the house. I had to go straight up to them and talk to them, because I knew if I did that and I just like nipped it in the bud, nipped my fear and my anxiety in the bud, and went and talked to that first person, no matter what, it was going to be easier the rest of the day. Man, that lesson was huge for me, and I learned it in other areas of my life as well. But that was a really cool experience for me there. But that was number one reason why it was hard. Number two reason why it was really hard was just the inner conflict that I'm talking about and sharing. Um, so, like I said, I met my wife in the MTC after my first area. I had been out, and I just thought of her face and her personality, like what I knew of her, just kind of stayed in my mind. I had the mission home address for her mission in Oregon, and so I thought, you know what? I'm just gonna put her name on it on this. I remember her name, Sister Martinson, and I'm gonna send a letter, put the mission home address on it, and worst case scenario, she just never writes me back. I didn't even know if she would know who I was. Um, well, she wrote me back, and we wrote our missions. You know, we were both very committed, hardworking missionaries with, you know, different approaches and very different missions. Her being in Oregon, very much, you know, hippie, where I was very much in the Bible Belt. So, you know, facing kind of a different crowd. And so we had very different experiences. But so I came back from my mission, and we got together really quickly. We hit it off, and we got married relatively quickly. And I told her before we got married. I told her about my concerns and my questions. How I basically what I told her, I said, "Look, you know, my mission was hard, and there was things that I questioned, and I still don't have complete confidence, but I know that this is a good thing, and I'm willing to commit I'm willing to commit to an active life in the church, a life active in the church." Um, and I did. We So we lived in Utah for a couple years while I finished undergrad, and I went to dental school. We went to Creighton in Omaha, Nebraska, where there was a pretty good community of LDS students going to professional degree schools there at Creighton. And so it was a really fun environment. I'm still, you know, close with several of the guys that I went to school with. Um, and things got a little bit more difficult for me. I found myself, I would bear my testimony, but it wouldn't be about the truthfulness of the gospel. It would be about some principle that I had learned and felt really good about. So that was my transition into trying to find a way to be authentic to myself without having to work through, you know, some of these struggles. Um, that was I graduated dental school in 2016, and we moved to East Texas, a town called Lufkin. I bought a practice there, and we actually lived right next door to the church. And we actually didn't know it when we were looking at the house, because we were looking at it virtually. We actually made an offer on the house before we had actually seen it in person. So we lived next door to the church. Um, Over time, I learned how to navigate things, and I found Stoicism. Ryan Holiday, an author, has written several books about Stoicism. You know, the philosophy of the Greeks. Marcus Aurelius, um, Plato, Aristotle, a lot of these guys, and he wrote these books in a way that just resonated so strongly with me. These were incredible principles that I didn't have to debate the legitimacy or the credibility of some person saying that they had seen something, or these claims of truth. It was like there was nothing like that. It was just like, hey, here's principles that are a good way to live life, and I could implement it without having to work through all that extra baggage. And that was so refreshing to me. So over time, I started to tell people, like, I'm a Mormon, but Stoicism is like my religion. And I kind of like settled into that, and found a way. It still was hard, but I still led family home evening. I led scripture study. The way that I would do that was similar to what I said about how I would bear my testimony. I would teach a lesson, and even if the lesson was on like something like the word of wisdom, or something like a revelation or something specific that may create a debate in my head, I chose to start with that, and then to focus on the principle and talk about how do we make decisions, how do we, why is this good, and why is this not good, and that's how I would teach my kids. That's how I would lead things. Scripture study was really still fun for me, because I could read a story about Nephi and Laman and Lemuel, and I could talk about their different approaches and how they thought about things and what actions in life that led to. Um, so that was good, but it also was extremely challenging. I did not enjoy going to church. I felt I felt like a fraud. I felt like I'm here, I'm part of this organization, but I'm not on board. I don't agree. Um, Sacrament meeting and classes became difficult for me, because they just would create these debates in my head, in my mind. I would go into it thinking, all right, just focus on the good things. Just focus on like the simple principles that that are good and a good way to live life. And I just would constantly find myself getting, torn or stuck by, man, is this true? How do we know that? Does that really match up? Those were the thoughts. And so most of what I would experience at church and in the temple was conflict. It's just a lot of questions, like, man, this doesn't feel right. Like, it was, man, it was, it's hard for me to even think about now, because it's been a while since I've thought about these feelings, and how deep they were, and how conflicted I felt a lot of the time. It was very challenging for me to feel like I wasn't being authentic. Um, it became more difficult over time. The last 2, maybe 3 temple recommend interviews that I had, I would get kind of nervous going into it, because I was thinking, I want to be honest. Like, I've got to be honest in these questions. Like, hey, I'm living. I'm living the like checklist questions for the temple recommend interview questions, but like these questions, like, do you believe in God and Jesus? Do you believe that Joseph Smith restored the church? Do you believe that the prophet today is a prophet and leads and guides us? Those questions were tough for me, and I remember the first time going into an interview where it was like it had gotten to the point where I didn't feel good about answering those questions and just saying yes. And so I told my wife, and we had a child at the time that he was going to be have his baby blessing. That was Emmett. He's now 6 years old, and I had a temple recommend interview before that, and I knew that, generally speaking, like, the rule for using the priesthood is to be worthy of holding a temple recommend. And so I told my wife, I said, look, um, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna have this interview. I've got to be honest. I can't just say yes to these questions, and I need to face the possibility that I may not be able to, use the priesthood. I may not be able to bless, our son. And that was hard for her. It was hard for me, and the the interviews were tough. I still remember, um, one of them was a really good guy, and he basically was saying like, "Yeah, you just need to have a desire. If you have a desire, the love is what it's really about. So if you have a desire and you're trying, you're living these things, then I'm going to sign your recommend interview and I'm going to consider you worthy." And so I was grateful for that. Um, Fast forward a couple years to the next uh, recommend interview, and it was again challenging. And I remember it wasn't the stake president, but he was a member of the stake presidency. And I told him, I said, "Look, I'm going to be honest. I can't answer yes to these questions." And he said, "Well, why are you here? Why are you doing this? Why do you want a temple recommend?" And I said, "Oh, I mean, this is a lot of my life. Like, I have inner conflict as far as my beliefs with the church, but I still want to be committed. I want to be faithful. I want to, I've committed to my wife to be active in the church. And so I'm trying to find how I can be honest and still make that work. And it's challenging." And he gave me the challenge and said, "Go home and fast and pray and read." And I said I would, and I did. I didn't. And so anyway, came back and I said, "Nothing's changed for me. I still feel the same." And he said, "Okay, I'm gonna sign your recommend. Just make sure you keep coming. Like, don't blah blah blah." And um, so anyway, it was a challenging time. And eventually, my wife started to have some really good friends in other churches other than the Mormon Church, and it led to her having a lot of conversations with her friends and saying, "Hey, what do you believe? And how is this different than what I believe?" She started to get interested. I remember, she invited a pastor to our house to have a conversation, and I sat down. She did this a couple times, and I was not excited about it. I didn't want to talk through things. I kind of felt like, look, I mean, my mission was having a lot of those conversations, and hers was not. Um, and so those were potentially challenging, but I kind of felt like, what, I'll support you in asking questions and exploring and going down this route the way that you would like to do that. And this just led to her having more and more questions. And over time, I started to feel relatively comfortable with this idea that, like, I'm a Mormon, but Stoicism is my religion. Like, I started to kind of settle into that and feel like, okay, this is good for our kids and blah, 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 blah. And my wife started to question, and she starts basically, like, at some point, she kind of came and said, "Look, we need to look into this. Like, we can't just turn our heads. We can't just look away. Like, we've got to look into this, and I want to do this together." And funny enough, like, I wasn't excited about that. I was like, "Man, I've tried this and, like, it's not a good outcome." And, but I wanted to be supportive. So I said, "Okay, let's do this. Let's look at the stuff together and make a decision together." And like, that's what's important to me, that we make decisions together. We're unified. Um, we started to do that, and man, that was a time full of conflict, inner conflict for her and I. We were both. It just was this roller coaster. We're reading stuff like the CES letter. We read Rough Stone Rolling, and I remember reading Rough Stone Rolling and reading, and like one day I'd be like, "Oh man, this is so cool. Like, Joseph Smith was awesome. Like, he's got to be a prophet." And then the next day I'm like, "There is no way that this dude is like legitimate." And so it was just this huge roller coaster and challenge to be able to work through these things. Long story short, eventually we came to the conclusion, like, in our opinion, there's just no way that this is true. There is just too many strikes, too many red flags with the history of the church and how things were formed, and like even statements that are being made now. There's just too much that it doesn't feel right. And and it's hard. I think a lot of people that have left the church for these types of reasons really resonate, but it's so challenging when you're raised your whole life to ask the questions and to think like, pray and ask God, and try and do what you think is right, but as long as it lines up with what the church says. That's um but like this idea, I mean, Joseph Smith, he prayed and he asked God. Like he was, and he was ridiculed, he was persecuted. And I remember talking to someone, and they said it was actually my brother. And I remember he said the church wants you to follow Joseph Smith. They don't want you to be like Joseph Smith. Just meaning like believe his account, but don't try and do that for yourself, and don't try and realize something or learn something that's not already accepted. Um, so we made the decision. We made the decision to leave the church. During this whole process, during for several years, I had been relatively open with my with my dad, a little bit less with my mom, but I had shared um, the process and talked about my questions and concerns that I had. Um, so anyway, that when we made the decision to leave, um, uh, the most difficult thing was telling our kids. Um, my oldest was 10, and the next one was 8. She had just been baptized a few months earlier, and so we finalized our decision, and it was on a Sunday that we told our kids. We sat them down, and we said, we actually didn't make the decision to leave. We told them what we were experiencing, and we said, look, we are open to how you guys want to work through this. We don't believe that the church is true anymore, and we have concerns, but we can work through this as a family. And if you guys want to do things, then we can, and we can go to different churches, or we can do, So it was, and I think it was the hardest for my oldest daughter. She was 10, but she was similar to how I was when I was a kid, where she'd kind of like clung on to the principles and values of the church. And so it was tough for her to hear, and it was a tough process. Um, Looking back, I wouldn't change anything. I felt like I made the decision in the way that I would like to. So we started navigating that and working through that with our kids. My wife was the young women's president at the time, and there was a young women's camp that she had been working like all year on, and organizing, and planning and preparing for. And she shared some of her thoughts and concerns with someone, that then told the bishop, and then the bishop called my wife and said, I think it'd be best for you not to go to young women's camp. It was really hard for my wife. Like, she we were kind of planning, like, she wanted this to go and be like the last experience that she could have with the young women, and have it be positive, and then try and make an exit. But it's okay how it worked out. It did make things a little bit awkward living right next door to the church. You would see the members every Sunday, driving to church, and that was a little bit of a tough transition. We did attend a non-denominational church for a little while, and for a little while it felt fresh and like kind of nice. Like, oh man, this message is so simple. It's really nice. And then over time, the same uh, the same the same questioning and line of reasoning starts to happen again, and I can go through that in further detail in the future. But um, my experience was, and has been, that any group, any organized religion, any club, any government organization, like there's always some not so good stuff in the history of things. And so, I kind of, my wife and I both got to the point where we were like pretty much agnostic. We weren't, we liked the idea of God and existing as spirits, but we weren't like super strong believers in it. um One thing that was really interesting, my wife went to a conference that was basically for people that had left the church, and it was intended to be like, hey, let's get together and let's have different people talk about how to work through this and stuff like that. And it was kind of like a mixed, it'd be good to have her on the podcast and have her talk through her experience, but it was kind of a mixed experience for her, where it was like, it was good for her to meet with others and to talk through things, but it was also really hard because she realized that there was no longer a path. Like, she had been used to having a path and having things laid out for her. She was used to a system where she could check the boxes and say, okay, I've got the thumbs up, I've got the green light, like I'm where I'm supposed to be. And she kind of started looking for, what does that look like now? And the people at this seminar and this conference, they all had different experiences and different things. And some of them were, lived like a radically different lifestyle, and others lived, somewhat the same. But um that was a tough realization for her, in trying to kind of like recognizing she was going to have to figure it out on her own. It wasn't as much a challenge for me because for years I had, like I said, like stoicism was my religion. And so that seemed to continue to resonate with me. And it was honestly like, it was pretty refreshing. It was like, man, no more church, no more like feeling guilt about things. Like, I can make decisions based on what I think is right, and like the integrity, like that's what's important to me. And that probably really helped my transition, because it wasn't just like cold turkey. It was kind of like I had already transitioned to stoicism in a way, and it kind of like bridged that transition. um so let's see. So moving on after that, uh I would say, what, a couple years later, I got to a point where I was starting to feel, I got into some like deeper philosophy, started to feel very atheist. And just that the odds seemed to be higher that it was likely that there was not a God. And that was really challenging for me to think through. And then I just started thinking, like, man, what's the point of anything? Like, 100 years from now, I'll be dead. Probably my kids will all be dead. Nobody's, I mean, 200 years from now, like, nobody's going to remember me or think about me. Like, what's the point? And it's not like I was suicidal. Like, I never like considered taking my life, but I also like questioned, like, if I did die, like, probably doesn't really matter. Um, I remember that there's some kind of a term for that. I don't remember it off the top of my head. Um, that led me to a lot of growth. Actually, it led me to seeking out help, and to discovering a lot of things that have led me to so much peace in life. And that's what I'd like to have most of this podcast be focused on, is talking about these things. So that's what most of these episodes are going to be, is sharing that journey. Um, to kind of skip all of that and just to give you an idea, like, what is my life like now? My life now, we don't attend any church. I don't necessarily believe in any one religion or dogma. I do believe in a higher power, spirituality, and even that is like really big for me. A year ago, I couldn't have said that. Um, we talk about religion and spirituality in my family with my children. It's an open topic, and everyone's free to believe what they want. Um, I talk about it relatively open with my extended family members, and so I want to talk a little bit about how I've been able to facilitate that, how, my parents and siblings have been good at the reciprocity in that process, because it is a process. It's not something that happens overnight. um, I do feel a lot of peace in life. I continue to feel more and more peace, month after month, year after year. And I've learned that you often hear people talk about the journey and the destination, and a lot of Western philosophy is like work, 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 and then eventually there's a payoff, and that's the idea that, like, it's all about the destination. And a huge mantra of my life now is that the journey is the destination. The point of all of this is the journey. Like, we just continue to grow. I was recently with someone. We went out to eat, and it was my first time meeting them. And they asked me, they said, "So, what are your religious beliefs now?" And I basically summarized by saying, I don't necessarily believe in one set of beliefs. What I know for myself is that I value love and growth in my life. So I guess I could say that love and growth is my religion. And that's continued to resonate with me. And so every day I consider ways for how I can grow and how I can have more love in my life and give more love in my life. So that's where I'm at now. I'll continue to share more ideas and like dive deeper into these things. Thanks for listening to my story, and hopefully this provides a baseline context moving forward, so that as you listen to me, you kind of know a little bit more about who I am and where I came from and where I'm going. Thank you for listening. I appreciate all of you. Feel free to reach out and let me know if there's more that you want to hear, as far as topics and stuff like that. So take care, everyone. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.